want to welcome folks back to our 39th weekly Zoom interview. And my guest today is Patricia Schmidt, and she wrote a biography about Margaret Chase Smith. Welcome. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Where are you coming to us from?
I'm coming from Gainesville, Florida.
And what brought you to Gainesville, Florida?
I came here straight out of a PhD program at Penn State to join the English department.
Okay. So how does someone whose major is in English and is teaching at the University of Florida get interested in Margaret Chase Smith, the senator from Maine?
Well, that is improbable, but I was interested in Margaret Chase Smith from the time I was a girl.
Okay.
I used to watch her on television. There would be snippets on the news, and I just found her very interesting.
Okay.
What's this woman all about? But she was so forceful and commanding, and so that curiosity stayed with me till I was an assistant or associate professor, I guess, and her papers became available. And then I made a trip over Christmas to meet with her and see if she would be interested in having me do her biography. And it worked out.
Very good. And so it just occurs to me that you very early came to the library in that it opened in '82. And I know some of the photos we have of you go back to '83.
Correct.
Yeah. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in York, Pennsylvania, which is a south central Pennsylvania area.
Okay.
Next to Lancaster, where people know about the Amish.
And growing up in that part of the world, in the mid-Atlantic, you were aware of this senator from Maine.
Well, my mother was very involved in politics, not as a candidate, but she helped to chair the Eisenhower campaign. I was in charge of several counties in Pennsylvania, and I heard a lot of talk about politics around the dinner table. So I wasn't sophisticated, but I was attuned to them.
Okay. In terms of being an English professor, what was your specialty?
Actually, American Lit.
Okay. A particular time period?
Well, the 20th century, American Lit.
And favorite authors?
Well, I hate to say it, it sounds very trite, but my favorite was Hemingway. And my second favorite was Faulkner.
Okay. I'm sort of fishing because we have a book discussion group that we do here at the library, and we're trying to decide what to do for summer. And I was sort of thinking of Hemingway because PBS has a series coming up on Hemingway, I think at the beginning of April. So
yes,
sort of leaning in that direction. All right, so now I have to ask you, if we do it in the summertime and we're going to do 3 Hemingway novels, what would your 3 recommendations be?
Well, I would not overlook Farewell to Arms. That's my favorite. I like his early work a little bit better.
Okay.
But the last work that he did is certainly provocative, shall we say. And just a minute. I want to say Garden of Eden, but that's not quite it.
Okay.
But he and his wife changed sex roles. So it raises a lot of gender questions. And I mean, when they went to bed, he had a woman's name and she had a man's name, and they were playing out all kinds of themes, which may not be appropriate for your group, depending on how conservative they are.
Interesting.
Garden
all right, so let's get back to Margaret Chase Smith, and here is the biography that you wrote, Margaret Chase Smith, Beyond Convention. And I think what I'll do to get into that is go to some photos that I have. And here is a picture of you doing some research at the library. It sort of makes sense now. This is later. This is 1996. And you're looking through a scrapbook. So tell us about your research experience at the Margaret Chase Smith Library.
It was the first congressional or presidential library I used. And I found it I quickly learned that this was about Margaret Chase Smith. And fortunately, I was a fairly neutral, although I admired her. I went to that with a sense of neutrality,
Yeah.
not an effort to build her reputation or anything else. I wanted to see what was there. And it wasn't always easy to get materials. It wasn't until my second trip, several years after my first, that I was able to get a look at the scrapbooks.
Okay.
Because they were under lock and key at first.
Well, yeah, that's probably, that may be the disadvantage of coming
so soon.
Yeah.
Yes. And there were some really nice tidbits in those scrapbooks. So I'm certainly glad I eventually was able to use them.
Yeah, I mean, we have over 500 of them, and in many ways, they are the richest resource.
Oh, you might want to know, I don't mean to put questions in to you, but you might want to know what that title means, Beyond Convention.
Oh, that was going to be my next question. How good of you to anticipate?
Okay.
Well, and here's how I was going to frame it. I had a professor in graduate school who always said, your title is your thesis.
Right.
So, what do you mean by Beyond Convention?
What I meant and mean was that she used not the props, but the signs of conventional womanhood to allay any fears that she was an agent of change. And yet she was a big agent of change because she was the first woman senator elected in her own right. She spent many terms in Congress. And she was a phenomenon then, just as Shirley Chisholm was, and other people who well, not all Black, but certainly Black and female. They were in scarce commodities. In fact, she told me when she went to the Senate, there was not a ladies' restroom. And so she had many things that she had to deal with that one wouldn't think about. But whenever she had a party or appeared before a group of people in Skowhegan, the decor was always very elegant and understated and feminine. There was nothing strident about her campaign or her way of being. And I think that allayed a lot of otherwise fears would have been produced.
This your explanation parallels a question we get a lot, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. We get the question a lot, was Margaret Chase Smith a feminist?
Not in today's sense of feminism. She had a strong belief in fair play. And when she didn't feel that women were getting a fair shake, as with the waves, she jumped in and made a big difference. But it wasn't out of an ideological feminist base. It was out of a sense of fairness and that women should have the same rights as men. Now, that's where feminism started, but that's not where feminism has gone, in my opinion. I think another author made the case that she was a pioneer for women and she was out there flag waving. Well, she wasn't. That was not her sense of herself.
Let's see what other photos we have here. So the book gets published so how long? I think people are often surprised how long it takes to write a book.
Oh, yes.
So how long was the research writing process for you?
The whole process took 14 years. That's a lot of time out of one's life.
It does. Well, I mean, the thing to point out is when you're an academic, you don't get to devote all your time.
No, I had a full-time job.
Yeah, you're teaching at the same time.
Yes. Well, actually, part of the time I was writing the book, I was Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Programs with the Board of Regents, and that's the state group that oversees higher ed. So I had various jobs. I came back to teaching after the book and was sorry that I had spent so much time being an administrator. Really, because I love teaching. Fortunately,
you were able to get back into the classroom.
Yeah, oh, yes.
They didn't keep kicking you up the ladder.
Yeah, right.
So this is you in 1997. The book gets published in 1997 at the University of Maine Press. And this is you coming to the library to give a talk as part of a women's history symposium. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes, I remember it well.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. I was pleased to learn that a number of other women were working on the BPW
Oh, yes.
group, because I had seen that as just a pivotal
Yeah.
experience for her.
Yeah.
And I was pleased other people, other faculty, I mean, other academics were working on that as well. I'd gone as far as I could with it, but they were going to go much further.
It was one of my colleagues when I was in graduate school at the University of New Hampshire, Candace Keynes. That was her dissertation, with the BPW. And Donta was another women's group from that time period. So she studied both of those groups. But yeah, it seems, it's always quite striking to me that, people often look at Margaret's opening to politics as coming through her husband, Clyde. I think in many ways it was through the women's groups that she was involved with.
That she got her training wheels through the women's group.
Yeah.
And I think she realized what she could do, not as a stepping stone, but she realized that she was good at running things. She was effective with people, and she could make change happen. And that was a gift that the BPW gave her.
And so we've been talking about her, but I mean, another aspect for you coming early when the library opens is that you get to meet Margaret Chase Smith. And this is a photo you took in 1983 down at Cundy's Harbor, where she had a summer home.
Right.
So is there anything you want to say specifically about this picture?
No, but I had it in my mind that she was like the figureheads that they used to have on boats, on ships.
Yeah.
That was what was going through my mind at the time. I would say that I was incredibly fortunate, because I'd called and made an appointment to go up there over Christmas, which seems like an unlikely time to go, but she was alone. And so she had time to go to breakfast. She had time to talk to me, get to know me, encourage me to come back the following summer.
Okay.
And then when I was there, I had two other opportunities that I treasure. One was she wanted to see the small towns that had voted for her initially. And she had macular degeneration, so she couldn't drive. And she asked me if I would like to take her all around Maine to see those small towns.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that story.
Really?
No.
Oh, yes.
How far afield did you get?
Oh, we made day trips.
Okay.
We went all over her district.
Oh. So when you went there, I mean, what did you just drive through, or did you
drive through? And I was taking pictures of churches because I'm fascinated with Maine churches.
Well, we have those pictures now. It makes sense. I'm thinking, I just figured it was you wanting to get an introduction to Maine, but it was at sort of Margaret's behest that you were going to places like Dixfield, Maine and Kingfield, Maine. Interesting.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And the reason that trip was so very important, well, there are many reasons, but one was I got to see how much she loved Maine.
Yeah.
It wasn't a put on, it wasn't a convenience. She deeply loved Maine. And she conveyed that to me without ever saying it. But she was interested in those people, and she was very fond of them. And the second thing that occurred along that same line was that she asked me if I would like to go to the Skowhegan Fair with her.
Oh.
And I said, absolutely. And so we went to the fair, and people descended on her in droves. It was the Queen has arrived, and they just got into, big groups and came up to her.
Yeah.
But
is there anything specifically she wanted to see at the fair, or she just
wanted to be out and about and be among her people? But what I I'm going to tell a story on her. One of the things I remembered very distinctly from that trip was the accent, and I wouldn't begin to imitate it. She said, "Now, if I ask you to take my arm, but if I don't ask you, don't take my arm." She had an imperious quality.
Yeah.
But the other thing I really want to get in today, and you might not ask me about it, but I want to say, I don't think the book really conveys the warmth of that woman underneath it all. I talk about her poise and a lot about her mannerisms, but she was really a very lovely, kind person underneath that exterior. And I saw it when she talked about her dog. She had a dog, Betty, that she had to leave behind when she went to Washington. It was not always easy to get beyond her facade.
Yeah.
But if you're lucky enough to break through, she's a very, very kind, lovely person.
So I'm starting to understand the timeline. The library opened in August of 1982. It sounds like you came Christmas of 1982.
Yes.
So you had to be one of the first
I was the
researchers.
second. I was the second one.
Okay. And then the photo that we're seeing now is from August of 1983. So that's the next summer when you came back.
Right.
Yeah. So, you've already started to give us some insight to Margaret Chase Smith, that there was sort of this public facade that had built up over the years, but behind it, there was this warm, very personal Margaret who very deeply cared about Maine and the people of Maine. What other things, all these years later, what stands out to you about Margaret Chase Smith?
She was tough.
Okay.
She was.
Was she tough with you?
When she talked with me?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Well, I knew I better know what I was asking her and what I was talking about, and not fool around. She did not have time for tomfoolery. You had to be authentic and you had to do your homework. So she was really a role model for me. I tend to be not quite that disciplined, I must say. But I showed up every morning at 9, and I stayed till the library closed. It opened at 9, and I stayed till it closed. Partly because I knew that was an expectation that would never be stated. But I knew it was an expectation. And there was plenty of work to do. But, if I got bored or something, I couldn't just go home at 3 o'clock.
Did you do some recorded interviews with Margaret?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And how many did you wind up doing? How many sessions?
I have a box of tapes. Are you angling for them?
No, I was just trying to get a sense of how much of it you were able to do as sort of in-person interviewing for your research, and how much was sort of the papers and archives part of the research.
Frankly, I depended more on the papers and the archives. I mean, I had plenty of time, and she was very giving of her time, but she had certain stories that she had told over and over and over again. And I wasn't about to become a microphone for those. Well, interesting though they were.
Yeah, that's the sense I've gotten, is there were sort of stock answers.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're the way to get past those is to actually do the paper research.
Yes, and one thing that I could not ask her about, because she got her back up a little bit, was Clyde. The first day I talked with her, she got irritated talking about Clyde. And she, after all those years, she was still mad at him.
Interesting. And so, we're talking over 40 years later, you're having this conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. A little birdie has told me that you still harbor an interest in maybe doing some research about Clyde.
Yes, I understand you have some letters. I'd at least like to look at them, but I'm not sure I'm going to be physically able to get up there to look at them.
Well, I mean, we have the means of being able to share them digitally.
That would be great. I would love it, because I think somebody needs to do something with them. They're just a lovely little peephole on the times.
They're actually pre-Margaret. They date from 1893 to 1897, when he's 17 to 21. And Margaret isn't even born.
No.
1897.
But Clyde was always something of a mystery, and I had some information. I had read some of the letters from his early life. I knew he very much liked women.
Yes.
And got into pretty deep relationships with them. But I gleaned some of that from the papers, of all things. But that chapter would have been much richer if I'd seen these letters. And I'm not sure that they can't stand alone in some format.
Yeah. Well, we'll work on that.
Okay.
All right. So along the way, you have dealings with the woman who, at the time you came here, would have been Margaret Chase Smith's secretary, Angie Stockwell, in the middle of the picture.
Yes.
And then also did work in the library. And
that's a good picture of Angie.
Yeah. It's a good picture of you too. And
Thank
this
you.
is actually taken at Margaret Chase Smith's 90th birthday, which was held at the Augusta Civic Center in 1997. And one of the things that made Angie so remarkable is that she just took researchers right in. So this is you at Angie's farm,
Right.
riding the horse Nutmeg.
I had another name for nutmeg, but I won't say what it was.
So had you been to Maine before when you came?
Oh, yes. I had been to Maine often. I have a distant family that has a place in Boothbay.
Okay.
But I had not been to the interior. I had been all along the coast, but and they're two different entities.
Well, here the way we refer to it in Maine is the other Maine, because so many people know coastal Maine.
Right.
Once you get inland, it's a
whole different thing. The people are different.
Yeah.
They haven't been ruined by tourists in the inland part of Maine.
Yeah, it's much different, especially in the summertime.
Oh, yes.
Different. All right, here, what else do we have? So, you these years of research and writing, you publish your book, and eventually you decide you don't need all your papers anymore, and you send them in boxes to us. And here's Angie going through them many years later. This is 2013. Through the
Angie doesn't look too happy.
Well, this is, Angie at this point is already thinking about retirement. No, here comes another collection she needs to process. So I kept being these little projects that keep her going, keep her on. She was
just such an asset to that library. I can't tell you. Because it's hard work. I mean, doing research is fun, or else you wouldn't do it. But it's also hard work and tedious.
Yeah. Well, beyond that, I mean, she doesn't even necessarily get the fun of the research, because with the research, you can tell pretty quickly whether something's important or not and move on. Right. But if you're the librarian, whether it's important or not, you still have to process it. You still have to input it into the database. So there was a lot of drudgery to her work. And every once in a while, she'd have these great nuggets that she'd find. But I couldn't have done what she did, is just day after day after day, go through these collections and put the information into a database.
Well, if the day was seeming very hard to me, there was always lunch with Angie to look forward to.
Well, I think that's one of the things that kept Angie going. I mean, she was very noted for going out at noontime, off to a restaurant, bringing a book or bringing a guest with her to keep her entertained. Yeah.
Right.
Very good. I think, let's see if I have any more photos here. Oh, well, we'll save this one for a moment. So is there anything else about the biography or about Margaret Chase Smith that you wanted to share? I mean, there's one particular aspect I want to bring up, but I didn't.
Well, go ahead. The one I wanted to make sure I said was that underneath it all, in spite of the fact that she was formidable, she was also a very sweet person.
Well, one of the things I wanted to say about the biography is that it's gotten a little resurgence of interest in that at the end of last year, one of the editorial writers for the Wall Street Journal, Peggy Noonan, who is known in political circles. She had worked for President Reagan. She now works for the Wall Street Journal, and she had latched on to Margaret Chase Smith as a model of a Republican that might be in need now, and wrote a couple of editorial pieces in the Wall Street Journal, and she cited your biography. And I believe you went on to have some discussions with her.
Yes, she called me.
Yeah.
And she wanted some more information and just to see what I might think that she didn't know. And then she published a second article citing me and the book again. She said that she couldn't put it down. Now I can't believe that. It's nice to hear. Well, why not? What else could an author want to hear?
Exactly.
It's almost too good to be true. But she was a very engaging person.
Yeah.
So I don't know what she's thinking about now, but I think she was so put off with Trump that she was looking to Margaret Chase Smith as sort of another kind of Republican.
thinking of other kind of Republicans, and in many ways, people focus on Donald Trump, but I'm a historian, and he didn't just fall from the sky. He's part of a historical process, and it's one that can be traced back very easily to 1964, which was a very pivotal election in American history. And it's one that is also very pivotal in the Republican Party. And it's one in which Margaret Chase Smith decides to run. And actually, probably a way to do that is to go back to the share screen and show this final image. There were a lot of Republicans who ran that year.
Oh, you're talking about for president?
Yes, for president.
Yes.
In 1964. Because it was a time when the Republican Party was a big tent, and there were people who were described as liberal Republicans, like Nelson Rockefeller, the governor of New York. And so these are the hats being tossed in the ring in 1964. And here's Rocky's hat right here. And there were very conservative Republicans, and standard bearer for them was Barry Goldwater, the senator from Arizona. And then there's lots of other hats somewhat in the middle, and that's sort of where Margaret saw herself coming into, is between the conservatism of Barry Goldwater and the New Deal Republicanism of Nelson Rockefeller. But there are other candidates as well. There was George Romney, the governor of Michigan, who was the father of Mitt Romney, the current.
Oh, I forgot that he ran in that year.
Yeah, George Romney is right here. That's his hat. Henry Cabot Lodge, a very patrician Republican from Massachusetts. Richard Nixon, who of course had been Dwight Eisenhower's vice president and had run for president in 1960 against John Kennedy, but he was still out there. And Harold Stassen, who was the perennial candidate from Minnesota. But in the middle of this cartoonist ring is William Scranton, who was the governor of Pennsylvania. And I recently learned that you had once considered doing a biography of William Scranton. So what can you tell us about William Scranton?
Well, I wish I could tell you more. He was, of course, from a storied family. Mm-hmm. He was a very straight shooter and a total gentleman. Now, I hate all these cliches, but I don't know what other words to use. Mm-hmm. He was very gallant. He was very inviting, very warm, very accepting, and put me in touch with his son, whom I didn't end up meeting, but I would have if I'd gone back. Mm-hmm. I left there. My mother had told me that his mother groomed him to be governor and groomed him to be president. I was interested in how that worked. Mm-hmm. But all of her letters were destroyed when she died, mm-hmm. at her behest. And there was not much left, just a biography of a good guy who was governor. Mm-hmm. Didn't seem to me to be the kind of thing that would hold people's attention. I didn't have any of the background that might have made it interesting. So I hesitantly walked away from that project. But I fell in my mother's barn when I went home from the trip. I had just told her how much I liked him and how right she was, that he was just a great guy. And I went up to the barn and tripped. My parents weren't farmers, they were gentlemen farmers. Mm-hmm. I tripped on something and broke 2 ribs. So I wrote to him and said I wasn't going to be back, at least for some time. And within a day or 2, I got the most beautiful bouquet of flowers. And that's the kind of man he was, just a darling man. Mm-hmm. And I have come not to particularly care for politicians. Mm-hmm. When I worked in Tallahassee, I had to work with them and I was surrounded by them and I basically distrust them. Mm-hmm. He wasn't of that sort. He would have been a wonderful president. But, as we know, the best people don't always get elected.
Mm-hmm. So the hook for you in the story would have been how his mother had groomed him.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
But that was lost.
That was lost.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Do you remember the 1964 presidential election?
Oh, do I remember it? Okay. The guy I was dating's father was a delegate, and he was a delegate for Scranton.
Okay.
And when they went to the cow palace, they were
Yeah.
barred from entering
Oh,
by the Goldwater people.
interesting.
They were literally barred from entering the cow palace.
Mhm.
And of course, Goldwater had that convention sewed up. He had started a year early, as you probably know, and he had tied up an awful lot of votes.
Mhm.
Nobody was going to come out of that convention with the nomination other than Goldwater.
Mhm.
And the Goldwater people, and some of them were my mother's friends, not my mother. She was always a moderate. But some of the Goldwater people that I met in my home in New York
Mhm.
were just rabid. They were like a lot of the Trump followers.
Mhm.
You couldn't talk to them. He was their little god. I'm being too candid, but there it is.
Yeah. Well, again, I think there is that connection. This is all part of a historical process, yeah, I think there was some concern amongst the Goldwaterites that with so many other candidates, might the vote get split. And they wanted to go to the convention and have him win on the first ballot. They didn't want it to drag on.
Right.
With all these other candidates, if some of the other candidates had dropped out and thrown their support to one candidate up against him, they were afraid of what would happen at the convention. So they had it sewn up going in, and he wins on the first ballot.
Yeah.
And so the story we tell at the Margaret Chase Smith Library is on the first ballot, she came in 5th place. Margaret Chase Smith came in 5th place. But then the party wanted to reballot because they not only wanted him to go out as the majority winner, they wanted him to go out as the unanimous candidate of the Republican Party. But on the second ballot, she wouldn't release her voters.
Yes.
So she technically wound up coming in second.
Yes.
And that's the way she always tells the story. We have video of her saying,
Yes.
I came in second. And people will sometimes call us on that and said, no, she came in 5th. Yes, she came in 5th on the first ballot, but she came in second on the final ballot. And I think in her mind, that was important for her to be able to say that and sort of lay.
Oh, it was. And 64 was a tough year for her in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
She lost the large percentage that she always had in re-elections. She still won, but she didn't win by as big a margin. Secondly, the Vietnam War was just making everything come apart.
Mm-hmm.
And she was challenged about whether or not American troops had gone into Cambodia or Laos, I forget which. And she said, oh no. And I think she was the 3rd ranking member of the Armed Services Committee at that time. Mm-hmm. So she should have known. But she said, no, they're not in Cambodia and Laos. And a young man who had fought for the United States challenged her in a public meeting. And it was very embarrassing, of course, because she was sincere. She didn't think they had gone in. So her information wasn't current. But she certainly stated some misinformation during that particular speech. And at the same time, the women's movement was going, and they weren't sure how they felt about her. So she had the first real opposition that she had had. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. What do I have to? Oh. Call from Edward and Marie. Sorry about that. Okay.
Any final thoughts on Margaret Chase Smith?
No, but if I could return for just a minute to 64.
64 presidential election.
Well, I'm talking about her re-election to the Senate.
Which were her next one would have been in 66, and then
no,
the final one in 72. And
yeah.
And that's when the Vietnam War really played a role in.
Okay, you're right. But she was the women's movement, and I never really understood this. The League of Women Voters didn't particularly support her. Mm-hmm. And
it comes down to that whole feminism debate.
Yes. Yeah. And she started to feel that in 66, mm-hmm. When she did not get the kind of vote that she was used to getting. And then, of course, she lost in 72.
Mhm.
I wish she hadn't run in 72,
Mhm.
but there was no stopping her.
Well, and in particular, the gauntlet got thrown down in that people told her that she was too old, and
Right.
A young upstart Republican ran against her and started bringing up her age, and that sort of clinched the decision that she was going to run when people started to intimate that maybe she was too old.
Well, a lot of, I'm sure you'll remember this, and I can't remember all the names, but a number of elderly Republicans lost that year. It was time for it to change.
Yeah.
And it was across the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So I hated to see her go out that way.
Mm-hmm.
She was as sharp as anybody,
Yeah.
when I met her, which was quite a bit later.
Well, that's an interesting question because you're meeting her. Well, it's 10 years after her having left the Senate. Was there any trace of bitterness at that point over having lost that last election, or had she by that point had she moved on?
I think she had moved on, but I think she missed being immersed in something.
Okay.
I don't think being retired was really her cup of tea.
Yeah. Well, in ways that becomes what the library becomes for. That becomes her new forum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks to Bill
Lewis.
Yes.
Yeah. Her assistant when she was in the Senate. Our post on Facebook today was an award that he received from the United States Senate, probably in 1969, which was commemorating his 20th year working for her. So it was an award for his service to the United States Senate.
Ah, okay.
We just found it.
I didn't know about it.
Yeah. So speaking of retirement, at what point did you wind up retiring from the University of Florida?
I can't even give you the year. I don't know. I've been retired about 8 years.
Okay. And are you keeping gainfully amused?
My first 2 years were very hard because I didn't have a project. Mm-hmm. And I missed my students. I missed the stimulation of that because I taught mostly juniors and seniors, and they didn't have to take the course. It was an elective.
Yeah.
And they knew what they wanted. They were all headed to law school. This wasn't Hemingway. This was a course in argumentative writing.
Oh, okay.
Which is not the fundamentals or the basics or the whatever, not logic, but what constitutes rhetoric.
Okay.
I missed that very much, but I had reached the point in my teaching where I felt like I was leaning on what I had already said. Mm-hmm. And I thought it's time to quit when you're not forging ahead. Mm-hmm. Now, I have to say, with lack of humility, I guess, that I did get a teaching award of outstanding teacher of the year. And I was nominated a second time. And that was so gratifying to me because I came back from being an administrator and right into the classroom. The kids had no problem with that. In fact, they appreciated the fact that I'd been out in the world.
Okay. Yeah.
My colleagues were a little less generous and a little less trusting. I was
yeah, you had been on the other side of the fence. You had gone over to administration.
Exactly. Yeah. So I got the worst office on the floor. Yeah. But it all worked out, and it was an excellent decision because I was not fulfilled being a paper pusher. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I could come home and finish my book, and people left me alone. Yeah. I didn't have to serve on committees. I'd been on all of them before. And I just wrote my book and taught my classes, and it was a wonderful life.
Have you found a project after those first 2 years of retirement?
No, I'm sorry to say I have not.
Maybe we found one for you.
Yes, I think you have.
Return to Clyde.
I collect for first editions, Modern American 20th Century. But, that's just a matter of finding them and paying for them, and it's not a big deal. Mm-hmm. So no, I think maybe you have found a replacement.
Yeah, well, we'll start sending you some of those letters and see what you think.
Okay, that would be great.
See if there's a story there.
Oh, I'm sure there is.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much. And in particular, I want to thank you for making the leap into Zoom technology. We had some technological glitches along the way, but we finally were able to make this work. And I'm very grateful for you.
Well, thank you for your patience as I stumbled along.
All right. Well, you take care and we
You
will
too,
be in
David.
touch.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.